Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to be here in Ljubljana today. Thank you very much. I'll emphasize, I've just got 4 slides, so hopefully we're able to keep to the 10 minutes. But I'll be emphasizing what we just heard in the last presentation as well, the importance of the long-term perspective and where our energy systems, economy-wide, must be going to. Right now in Stockholm, the world's governments are meeting to finalize a report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And the changes that have to be made in our lifetimes in terms of decarbonization are enormous challenges. Jean-Michel spoke about the moon. When I look at this challenge, frankly, it is the equivalent of a moon landing to believe that our emissions can be reduced by 2050 by around 80% from the levels that they are now. But it has to be done. The science is solid. Particularly in the American or the Australian media, you see claims that the science is not strong. It is. I think nobody would work on climate if the science wasn't compelling. And we know that a world that warms beyond 2 degrees centigrade, which is much greater temperature increases on land, which leads to unpredictability of weather patterns, affecting food security, many, many issues. This is a place that the world should not go to. And it's not just DG Climate Action or my commissioner, Connie Hedegaard, who says this. It's Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF. It's the head of the World Bank. President Obama is very clear, although he has less success on Capitol Hill in getting the policies through. So this is what has to happen, 80% reduction of greenhouse gases from industrialized countries by the year 2050, and very significant reductions from developing countries as well. I'll say a word more on that, but go from the general picture to the specifics of how do we do this. Since 15 years now, Europe has really been following, in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, a market-based approach. We learnt this from the Americans, from their sulfur dioxide trading system. And the market-based approach is done because harnessing market forces, getting companies, consumers to take the right choices is much better, we think, than governments trying to pick the winners. We live in an unpredictable world. We do not know what will necessarily happen in terms of technology developments, consumers' investments, these kinds of things in 10 years. 10 years ago, who would have seen that iPhones, iPads would be as widespread as they are now? So using market forces is the way ahead, and we see this globally. The United States has tried to do the same as Europe has had in place since 2003. In California, in New England, they've managed, but at federal level, they've not been able to. The so-called Waxman-Markey bill passed the House of Representatives. It couldn't pass the Senate. This is also because the politics of climate change are enormously difficult. I'm glad to say, I think in Slovenia and on most of continental Europe, there isn't really dispute about whether climate change is real science or not. The urge to disbelieve is enormous. I hate the fact of what the science is telling us, but it's still true. And I mean, facing this as a reality is what Europe's politicians have generally been doing, and this is really important. On the other hand, alleviating poverty, growth, competitiveness of industries is vitally important as well. Climate change is not the sole issue we're facing, and we may be lucky. The emissions into the atmosphere may have less effects than the scientists have been telling us. Many of us have house insurance, car insurance, things like this. In terms of taking a considered approach, we're better off not testing our luck here. And this is where an emissions trading system, basically putting an economy-wide cap on emissions and then having companies and businesses drive the investments that need to take place to meet that cap makes sense. The system in Europe, running for 9 years now, covers 31 countries. It covers around half of the emissions of those countries, something like 2 billion tons of emissions a year. Slovenian colleagues have been very involved in building up this European system, and it's really important globally because of the example it can give. It's not a panacea. It does not solve the importance of proper energy market regulation, of investing in research and development, many other issues. But it is meant to give a price signal that takes Europe to achieve specific reduction goals, and goals that are set out in the legislation well beyond 2020, even up until 2050, although the levels of reductions aren't what science tells us needs to be done. I come more in my next slides on to where we are right now, but just a few words on the international reasons. If you want to reduce emissions, you can either tell companies what to invest in, and there's strong lobbies saying we should invest in carbon capture and storage. I think this is a promising technology, but it also seems to be very expensive. And in times of economic crisis, is this the best thing to do? Why not use more gas? It's lower emissions than coal. So instead of directing what energies must be used, using the market is a great example for how you can cost effectively do this. And you can use the market through either taxes, and if Slovenia wants an energy tax, I think it has energy taxes, you can do these for Slovenia, or the United Kingdom can do it for the United Kingdom. But energy taxes Europe-wide have been tried in the past. We need unanimity of 28 countries to achieve this. It has frankly not proven possible. So giving a market signal through a cap-and-trade system has worked. ExxonMobil in the US supports a carbon tax. It's welcome that they're supporting measures, but in the United States as well, a tax at federal level is very hard to get voted through the Senate. A cap-and-trade system looks more likely in the long term. Equally, China, and do not think for one moment that in Brussels we're on the moon or we're in an ivory tower. We're not. We're perceived as that. But the actions taken by China, by India, by Brazil, but also by Ukraine and the North African countries are very important. We're trying to get international agreements under which all countries act, but we're also cooperating day to day. China has begun emissions trading. South Korea has voted for an emissions trading system. The politics are difficult in these places, but China will probably be affected by climate change worse than Slovenia. That's a very harsh way to get the Chinese to act, and action from China will come because the Chinese government wants to do it. But other countries around the world are acting. It's a fallacy that it's only Europe. The ETS has very much changed with effect from 2013, particularly for the power sector. There are only in a few cases free allocations of pollution rights. Generally, switching on a light switch today is coming from a power producer who is paying for the emissions that are caused. This is a very big change. It also means governments are making considerable money from the emissions trading system. Even at today's carbon price of €5.50, governments are still likely to make €5 billion across Europe this year. At heads of state level, they have said, we will use this, at least half of this, to tackle climate change. Germany's doing so, France is doing so, Estonia is doing so. Some government leaders had their fingers crossed behind their backs. I hope that's not just a British-specific custom. But, for example, the United Kingdom says they do not hypothecate revenue for particular purposes. In practice, they are spending equivalent amounts to tackle climate change. But I think it's a really important signal to the public when emissions trading has an effect on prices, which it does. It's intended to do so, but that effect is small compared to other factors. But if the public can see governments are using this revenue they make to tackle the problem, then that's really important. At European level, and Slovenia was instrumental in getting this mechanism developed at European level, the ETS system has hypothecated around €1.5 billion to support the technologies we need to tackle climate change. In practice, carbon capture and storage were not the best candidates for this, and 23 renewables projects around Europe are being supported. Slovenia is also bidding for 3 projects in the next call for proposals. I said we should let the market choose the winners. This is one element where governments are picking the winners. But I think we don't live in a perfect world. We could wish we did, but using all the channels available when we look at the scale of the challenge are important. In addition, there is harmonized support in Poland and others for supporting energy networks and others to make the transitions needed. And I would really emphasize here, the energy sector is playing a big part in the transition we need. Other sectors are not necessarily doing so. I've worked a lot with the aviation sector. The shipping sector emits 1.2 billion tons a year, more than the whole of Germany. The steel sector, the chemical sector are big emitters. And I think for the energy sector to actually speak up more, emphasize what you are doing is important, and that you also want others to contribute. For the steel sector, for the chemical sector, for the paper sector, there are billions of euros worth of free allocations going to these sectors because Europe wants to stay industrial, we want to stay competitive. It would be great if all countries in the world priced carbon the same way Europe does. But that will not happen overnight, and measures are being taken to make sure that obviously industry stays competitive, but also becomes more efficient. My last slide, I think I would emphasize here, because I think this is a common perception in the energy sector. The emissions trading system is not considered to be in perfect health at the moment, to speak fairly diplomatically. I'm a lawyer, not an economist, but an economist would say, well, it's achieving its reduction goal, that's great, leave it alone. It is achieving the reduction goals, but this is in part due to the recession. And that's not a good reason to be achieving big reductions in emissions. It's in part due to multiple targets as well. This is something that's being looked at right now, and the debate is ongoing. But a carbon price of €5 in the energy sector is not seen as sufficient to get us to where we need to be. In the aviation sector, it may be seen as too high. This comes back to my last point. But the emissions trading system is delivering or involved in delivering the reductions we need. But generally, people don't believe that if we have to reduce emissions by 2050 or by 2030 by the levels we have to, that a €5 carbon price is sufficient. This has led to extremely difficult political discussions in Brussels, in the Parliament, and in Council. Hopefully those will come to a close in the coming months, at least the first round of them after the German elections. But the issue of whether we have one target for the year 2030, a greenhouse gas target, whether we also have renewables targets, whether we have energy efficiency targets, and if we don't have these at European level, whether we have them at national level. This is a very live debate right now with very important consequences. I would echo what Dr. Jourdan just said about the importance of next year's Parliament elections. It's in 2014 and 2015 that these choices will be made. And I think this debate is very much ongoing, and I would encourage everyone to be active in this. Thank you very much.